two so-called enemies of the people have been triumphantly dispatched. That the President of the United States was proudly proclaiming to a cheering audience sworn to defend the Constitution that he was a murderer and that he had also assassinated the U.S. Constitution is extraordinary evidence that Americans are incapable of recognizing the threat to their liberty. Emotionally, the people have accepted the new powers of the President. If the President can have American citizens assassinated, there is no big deal about torturing them. Amnesty International has sent out an alert that the U.S. Senate is poised to pass legislation that would keep Guantanamo prison open indefinitely, and that Senator Kelly Ayotte might introduce a provision that would legalize enhanced interrogation techniques, a euphemism for torture. Instead of seeing this danger, most Americans will merely conclude that the government is getting tough on terrorists, and it will meet with their approval. Smiling with satisfaction over the demise of their enemies, Americans are being led down the garden path to rule by government unrestrained by law and armed with the weapons of the medieval dungeon. Americans have overwhelming evidence from news reports and YouTube videos of U.S. police brutally abusing women, children, and the elderly, of brutal treatment and murder of prisoners not only in Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and secret CIA prisons abroad, but also in state and federal prisons in the U.S. Power over the defenseless attracts people of a brutal and evil disposition. A brutal disposition now infects the U.S. military. The leaked video of U.S. soldiers delighting, as their words and actions reveal, in their murder from the air of civilians and news service cameramen walking innocently along a city street shows soldiers and officers devoid of humanity and military discipline. Excited by the thrill of murder, our troops repeated their crime when a father with two small children stopped to give aid to the wounded and were machine-gunned. So many instances. The rape of a young girl and murder of her entire family. Innocent civilians murdered and AK-47s placed by their side as evidence of insurgency. The enjoyment experienced not only by high school dropouts from torturing they knew not who in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, but also by educated CI operatives and PhD psychologists. And no one held accountable for these crimes except two lowly soldiers prominently featured in some of the torture photographs. What do Americans think will be their fate now that the war on terror has destroyed the protection once afforded them by the U.S. Constitution? If Awlaki really needed to be assassinated, why did not President Obama protect American citizens from the precedent that their deaths can be ordered without due process of law by first stripping Awlaki of his U.S. citizenship? If the government can strip Awlaki of his life, it can certainly strip him of his citizenship. The implication is hard to avoid that the executive branch desires the power to terminate citizens without due process of law. Governments escape the accountability of law in stages. Washington understands that its justification for its wars are contrived and indefensible. President Obama even went so far as to declare that the military assault that he authorized on Libya without consulting Congress was not a war, and therefore he could ignore the War Powers Resolution of 1973, a federal law intended to check the power of the president to commit the U.S. to an armed conflict without the consent of Congress. Americans are beginning to unwrap themselves from the flag. Some are beginning to grasp that initially they were led into Afghanistan for revenge for 9/11. From there they were led into Iraq for reasons that turned out to be false. They see more and more U.S. military interventions, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, and now calls for invasion of Pakistan and continued saber-rattling for attacks on Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. The financial cost of a decade of the war on terror is starting to come home. Exploding annual federal budget deficits and national debt threaten Medicare and Social Security. Debt ceiling limits threaten government shutdowns. War critics are beginning to have an audience. The government cannot begin its silencing of critics by bringing charges against U.S. Representatives Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich. It begins with anti-war protesters who are elevated into anti-war activists, perhaps a step below domestic extremists. Washington begins with citizens who are demonized Muslim clerics, radicalized by Washington's war on Muslims. In this way, Washington establishes the precedent that war protesters give encouragement and thus aid to terrorists. It establishes the precedent that those Americans deemed a threat are not protected by law. This is the slippery slope on which we now find ourselves. Last year, the Obama regime tested the prospects of its strategy when Dennis Baer, Director of National Intelligence, announced that the government had a list of American citizens that it was going to assassinate abroad. This announcement, had it been made in earlier times by, for example, Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan, would have produced a national uproar and calls for impeachment. However, Blair's announcement caused hardly a ripple. All that remained for the regime to do was to establish the policy by exercising it. Readers asked me what they can do. Americans not only feel powerless, they are powerless. They cannot do anything. The highly concentrated, corporate-owned, government-subservient print and TV media are useless and no longer capable of performing the historic role of protecting our rights and holding government accountable. Even many anti-war internet sites shield the government from 9/11 skepticism, and most defend the government's righteous intent in its war on terror. Acceptable criticism has to be couched in words such as, "It doesn't serve our interests." Voting has no effect. President change is worse than Bush-Cheney. As Jonathan Turley suggests, Obama is, quote, "the most disastrous president in our history," end of quote. Ron Paul is the only presidential candidate who stands up for the Constitution. But the majority of Americans are too unconcerned with the Constitution to appreciate him. To expect salvation from an election is delusional. All you can do, if you are young enough, is to leave the country. The only future for Americans is a nightmare. Again, ladies and gentlemen, that was Paul Craig Roberts, who was Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. You can't do much better than that. Well, okay, Matt, I'm just going to give my information right now, and then I think we might as well go to break. We're nearly there. We've got about 3 minutes to go. So here we are. I'm Richard Martin. This is the Wake Up Call. And before I forget, please don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, all in the delights of how to leave the country according to the recommendation and advice of said Paul Craig Roberts. There will be another meeting of the Richard Martin Meetup Group on the 30th of October. That's a Sunday at 2 p.m. And I believe I'm right in saying it will be at the same venue. That's to say Evelyn's Restaurant in New Brunswick, New Jersey. For fuller details, please consult the top of my page, my archives page, and call Lou at the stated phone number, and he will give you full details. But I do honestly advise as many of you who can possibly make it to go to the third meeting. This will now be the third meeting of my meetup group, and results have been very satisfactory. People have enjoyed the information they've received, so go along for the ride. Okay, so let me continue. This is the wake-up call, and if you want to call in, please do so. The number is 888-874-4888, and that's our toll-free number for you to call in. Any comments about the article I just read would be greatly received. I'd love to hear from some of you if you have anything to say about that. Okay, again, the number to call in is 888-874-4888. And if you would like to write in, you can do that too. And the number to write, or rather the email address to write to is rm@gfawd.com. And the email address is constantly open here so if you do write in, I will pick it up and throw it out to company present. Again, my email address is rm for Richard Martin @gfawd for Global Financial Advisory Wealth Design, gfawd.com. And finally, my private line, my direct line, if any of you want to call in about your personal problems, this is proving to be a really popular means of talking to me. A lot of people are calling in about their money market funds or their retirement accounts or what to do about their mortgages, etc., etc. Do feel free, call me. My number is a Sarasota area code 941-441-682, and I will pick up here in Singapore, halfway around the world. Anytime, just leave a message, a name, and a phone number. I will call you back. Don't forget, your day is my night. My day is your night, so anytime will do just fine. Again, the number to call is area code 941-441-1682. Comes through straight to me in Singapore. Okay, so let's take our break, and I will be right back. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me just have a quick comment on the Manhattan downtown protesters. I feel that they are somewhat misunderstood. I think that it is extremely hard to come to terms with what the problems really are for the ordinary man in the street. The issues are really very complicated. We do have a sort of manifesto. I don't really agree with it. I think it's appallingly amateurish, but this is a grassroots effort. And as soon as it gets hijacked by some political entity, it's finished. So we don't want to see that happen. We want to see that if this is to turn into something really effective, that somehow or other it provides a threat to the establishment. But you know, the people in these demonstrations nationwide, they really don't understand the issues. If you listen to them talking, with a few exceptions, there are a couple of very eloquent people that have been speaking. I've actually listened to a couple of minutes of 2 or 3 people that have spoken. Most people They really don't know why they're there. They don't understand